I'm always amazed how quickly word spreads that Father Sibley and Father Pelletier aren't going to be at Mass. And then the church just fills up. It's amazing. A couple of weeks ago in this church, I had the great honor of witnessing the marriage of two of my very dear friends. And so during the wedding festivities, as the groom was giving his toast the night before the wedding, he made a comment that stuck out to me. He said, "This was not the path that I had planned." Got married a little bit later in life. He said, "But I'm happier than I ever could have imagined." And it stuck out to me because that is very much the same way that I feel about being a priest. This is not the path that I had planned. It's not the one I would have necessarily have chosen. But it's a good thing that it wasn't my plan, right? That I followed God's plan, because I could not imagine being happier than I am as a priest. And I think this idea shines light on today's celebration. That we celebrate today Mary, the Mother of God. It's the last day in the octave, the 8-day celebration of Christmas. And it's the first day of the new year. So it seems like a very fitting time to reflect on three things, which is very convenient because I love having 3 points for my homilies. Now we should reflect on where we've been, right, looking backwards. We should reflect on where we are. And we should reflect on where we are going. And so the first idea, right, we should look back. We should reflect on where we've been. Specifically where we've been in regards to the celebration of Christmas. Right? We have this whole season in the church year leading up to Christmas, right? The season of Advent. This is where it all started. Right? This is the beginning of our liturgical year. And so we begin with this waiting. Not with any type of waiting, but a joyful expectation of what is to come. And that season of Advent teaches us, or it should teach us, how to wait well. Right? Not sitting around getting into trouble, but waiting for something that we know is to come and looking forward to it with joy. And this is something that me and my friend both experienced, right? This need to wait for what God has planned for us, right? We both experienced this anticipation, this excitement, at times a frustration, right? With having to wait for what God has plans for us. And all of these emotions, right? All of this waiting helps us to prepare. Helps us to prepare well. Father, what does it help us to prepare for? That's a great question. And that brings us to the second point. Right, the second point that we should reflect on, after reflecting on where we've been, is we should reflect on where we are. Right, we are at the end, still in the celebration of Christmas. Right, the octave. The nativity, the coming of Christ among us. And so Advent is sort of marked by this idea of expectation, right? Looking forward to something. And so the mood, I guess, that we could use for Christmas to describe what Christmas is about is this openness or receptivity, right? To what it is that God wants to give us. We've been expecting it, we've been waiting for it, and now we have to be receptive to it. Right? The waiting of Advent prepares us to be ready to receive Christ when he comes. And if we enter into Advent well, if we entered into that waiting well, if we watched in prayer and in entering into the celebrations that the church gave us, then we have been able to celebrate Christmas with greater joy. Right? If we didn't prepare well, then Christmas might have come and gone without us really thinking about it. Right? Having that season of expectation helps us to be receptive to God when he comes. So I called my friend whenever I decided to go to seminary, the one friend I had. I called him and told him that I was going to seminary, right? I finally made the decision. And his response to me was, "It's about time." Right? I'd been thinking about it for quite a while, and so he was relieved that I finally would stop talking to him about it, I guess. But I told him, I said, yeah, that's true, right? I did drag my feet maybe a little. It took me a little while to decide. But everything that happened in my life up to this point made me ready to be able to say yes. Right? It made me ready to be able to receive that call that Christ was giving to me to follow him in this particular way. Right? Just like the waiting of my friend for his bride made him ready to receive her whenever God finally put them together. Right? Our waiting in that season of Advent makes us ready to receive Christ during this celebration of Christmas. And so we've seen where we've been, right? Advent in this time of waiting, this time of joyful expectation. We know, hopefully, where we are, right? At the end of this celebration of the octave of Christmas, where we are receptive to what God wants to give us, the way he wants to come into our life. And then we have to think about where we're going, right? Because this isn't the end. We have to think about the future. We have to think about the rest of the year, really the rest of our lives. And to do this, right, we celebrate this solemnity in honor of Mary's divine motherhood. Right, we look to Mary to see how to do this. And one line from the gospel should strike us and should sort of shape how we live out the rest of this year. And it is that Mary kept all of these things, reflecting on them in her heart. Another translation is that Mary treasured these things, and she pondered them in her heart. And so if the past is marked by this joyful expectation, if the present is marked by this receptivity to God coming into our lives, then the future should be marked by this, right? This treasuring of the fact that God has come into our lives. This treasuring of what has happened to us. Right? Whenever I finally decided to go to seminary, I didn't sort of throw out the memory of God's call. Right? I actually used it a lot. Whenever I was having a bad day in seminary and I kind of wanted to leave, I would go to the chapel and I would pray. And I would pray specifically about that time, or the times that I knew that God was calling me to be a priest. And I would reflect on those memories, right? I would treasure them in a sense in my heart. And I would allow them to help me to keep doing what God wanted me to do. And the same way it is with my friends, right? They're not going to just throw out the memory of their wedding day. In fact, they spent money to make sure that they would be helped in remembering their wedding day, right? They hired a photographer or 3 or 4 that were floating around the church. Right? They had someone videoing every single thing that was happening. My friend, the groom, had a microphone on him, and so he knew he needed to be careful what he said, right? Because they were recording every word that was coming out of his mouth. Not that he would say anything bad anyway. But they spent money and energy and time in having these memories preserved so that they could continue to treasure them, continue to live out of them, right? Continue to use them whenever they have their bad days or when they're celebrating with their friends, right? We've gotten together since then and we've talked about the wedding. That was just 2 weeks ago. Hey, remember when we did that? Yeah, that was awesome. Right? We treasure this joyful experience in our heart so that it can continue to help us to live out that joy that comes from doing what God has asked us to do. And so we have these sort of 3 stages, but in reality, right, all of these 3 seasons have to be a part of our life at all times. Right? We should always be living with this joyful expectation, right, of Christ showing himself to us in new ways and looking forward to his second coming, right? That's what Advent is supposed to prepare us for. We should always be open and receptive, right, to the coming of Christ into our lives, even and especially when it's not how we would have planned. Right? Sometimes God works the best whenever he kind of catches us off guard. And so we have to be receptive to the way he kind of breaks into our lives, the way he ruins our plans, the way he comes in and wants us to receive him. And we should always keep these encounters that we have with God, right, in a beautiful celebration of the Mass. These encounters that we have with God in our personal prayer time. These encounters in these very profound moments in our lives. We should keep them in our hearts, right? We should treasure them. We should ponder them to see what it is that God is trying to teach us through them. And so as we close out this octave of Christmas and we begin 2019, I'll end with the prayer that comes from our first reading, and which will happen if we always expect the Lord to come, if we always receive him when he does, and if we always treasure our encounter with him. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace.